I've had quite an interesting journey in life. My mother used to stay in Hillbrow. My father was a diamond smuggler. He was arrested around the time I was born. Around 99, my mom was not well. And I was told my mom passed away. I think my world shifted that day. Everything just shifted because there was a father I had that I knew nothing of and I had short memory of. And here's the one person who I still had questions for about this man and all that. And I was told that person is gone. And I remember the conversation, everyone was just saying, hey man, I've got responsibilities. And that conversation broke me for the longest time. And I think part of what developed in terms of the relationship with my family was because of that conversation. And because of that conversation, I needed to shift. I didn't believe I could stay with my family. We decided I'd be taken to another family to take care of me. I was in a private school. One day I was given a letter to take home and it said that school fees had not been paid for 6 months. And at some point schooling has to stop. And there was a point where I even had a prayer to God. I was like, God, I think you can take me. And I had not enjoyed my childhood because I had to be on survival mode ever since my mother died. My favorite scripture is Psalm 121.
And it
says, I lift my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from?
Hello and welcome back to Mindfulness Beyond the Mind podcast. I am your host, Keneilwe Maake. Thank you for tuning in, as always, and for liking, subscribing, and sharing the content with those you care the most. Today, our episode is one that I've been looking forward to because I hardly have men on the podcast. I'm struggling to find people who come and speak from a men's perspective. So thank you for making the time and for allowing me to engage with you in this setting. My guest for today is Lonwabo. How do I say your surname? Ganelo. Yes. My guest for today is Lonwabo Ganelo. Most of you, if you are in the Methodist church, you know him from church. Others maybe know him from a social setting. But the purpose of why we are here today is to speak about identity crisis and also to hear it from a perspective of a man. So come in and join in on the conversation. I'm looking forward to unpacking everything that we will discuss, and hopefully you'll leave us with a penny for thought so that we can understand men better as women. So come along for the journey. Lonwabo, welcome once more.
Thank you so much.
How does it feel sitting there?
Well, we've been planning this.
Yeah.
We've been planning it for a while now. So it eventually happened. I was trying to run away from you for a long time, but you didn't give up.
Like,
Look, I'm here.
I would be pleased to respond to my messages.
Yes, no, we're here. It's good to be here. It's good to be here with you.
But thank you for honoring the invite. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So on our podcast, what we generally do is we start with icebreakers before we get into the conversation. So that
Should I be nervous?
No, don't be nervous. I think I'm going to make it easy for you. I'm going to speak about the questions will be around everything that you already do.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it will be this or that so that we get to know you better before we get into the conversation.
Oh, let's go for it. Let's start
with the easy one. I've seen you posting about soccer, so I'm going to ask about soccer. Sundowns or Kaizer Chiefs?
Definitely Sundowns.
Why?
International team, plays in international tournaments, competing world stages. Also pleasant football to watch, beautiful football to watch. I've been a fan for many years now, so definitely not Kaizer Chiefs.
Okay, all right. Well, somebody must not hear you say that because Kaizer Chiefs fans, they
take it personally.
Yes, they have small hearts.
No, they do.
So yeah. Of course, we're not offending you in any ways, but he is a Mamelodi Sundowns, Bafana Pretoria. So yeah. Okay, and then when it comes to spiritual life, preaching or singing?
Singing.
What? Why?
I actually, funny enough, I'm also in a worship team at my local society in Calvary Methodist Church. So I'm in the worship team there. I find that I enjoy that space more. Yeah. Preaching happens by virtue of being in the position that I'm in.
Yeah.
But not something I like, but I prefer worship.
I wouldn't have said.
Yes.
I thought you would say preaching because most of your engagement is talking. Like you have to be, you're addressing people in most instances. So I thought preaching will come naturally because of that.
Oh no. Worship. I'm also a musician as well. So I play guitar in the worship team.
Oh,
I've been playing guitar for close to about 15 years now.
self-taught?
No, I was taught by a gentleman in Calvary when I got there. A gentleman by the name of Greg. He used to lead worship as well there. So he taught me guitar as well. And bought me the small guitar, and we would say,
Practice.
practice. And I used to do that. And in no time, I used to be able to play and participate in the worship team. So it's something I enjoy thoroughly. I've been playing guitar and worshiping, singing for many years now.
Wow.
So I know it sounds strange, but I prefer that over preaching.
Yeah, it does sound strange. I never thought you are like singing would be the route that you'll go to, obviously because of the setting that maybe I got to know you in, which was mostly addressing the people. Like
Yes.
Yeah.
No.
And then lastly, indoor, outdoor person? Are you
Outdoor.
crowd?
Outdoor. I love being outdoor. If you're even inviting me, make sure we're sitting outside. Getting some fresh. We're in offices from Monday to Friday.
So you do need that.
You need to be outside
scenery.
a bit and enjoy nature. So I prefer being outdoors. I tried hiking for a bit.
Didn't work.
Kunzima, eh?
What's that? Like
Kunzima, but it's beautiful though, being outside with nature and all that. I just need stamina for it. I'll go back someday.
Yeah, someday.
I'll go back definitely.
Okay, all right, interesting. I didn't think you'd say outdoor because most of your job from the church, you are there. Maybe I would have thought you'd say indoor so that I can gather myself, be in my own space.
I think being outdoor as well and being one with nature is where you get to gather your thoughts, get to relax. And it must be also, I think, that time when we transitioned from COVID.
Yes.
Because we were indoors so much, we came to appreciate
going
outdoor.
Yeah.
You remember how hiking was a thing after COVID. Everyone was just hiking because we appreciated nature. For the first time, breathing that fresh air. Not having to walk around wearing a mask and all that.
Yes.
So I was converted during that time as well. Before that, I probably would have said indoors.
Okay.
But from that point, no, I was converted.
Okay, interesting. And are you ready to get into the conversation now?
Let's go for it.
So before we even maybe speak about the topic for today, can you just tell the viewers at home and myself, who's Lonwabo, growing up, how was childhood? What do you remember or treasure the most? And literally where you're from?
Well, I've had quite an interesting journey in life. So funny enough, I was born in Johannesburg. I'm born and bred in Johannesburg, even though my family is from Queenstown in the Eastern Cape. I was born in Johannesburg. My mother used to stay in Hillbrow at the time. Hillbrow then and now completely two different things. So I stayed there. I grew up there. I was born there. My father was a diamond smuggler and was arrested around the time I was born. My childhood memories of him are going with my mother to visit him in jail at the time. But at some point, the visit stopped. Not a very good memory of it, but at some point, the visit stopped. I then moved from staying with my mother, who was staying in town at the time. I moved to a place called Swanaville. It's just outside Kagiso, next to Kagiso in the West Rand. I moved there, stayed with my aunt, who was staying there at the time, who raised me. At some point, my mom moved from Johannesburg. She then moved to Ivory Park. I then went to stay with my mom afterwards. I've got an older sister who was staying with her father's family in the Eastern Cape. I then had a younger sister who was born around the time when my mother was staying in Ivory Park. When I was staying in Ivory Park with my mom, she used to go to church. There was a church we used to visit in Alex. She used to go to a lot. So I used to go with her there. I even remember I was baptized in that church.
Okay.
She used to take me there. My mom was not a church-going person, but she was quite a very strong believer. She was someone who
Faithless.
had strong faith. And she imparted that into me as a result. I mean, her and I would sit, the two of us, and she would tell me to be singing. There was a song she used to always ask me to sing Jalo for her. Jalo, Jalo. She used to always ask me to sing, that one. She used to ask me to sing that for her. Around 99, in the beginning of 99, my mom was not well.
Yeah.
She used to stay in Ivory Park with her sister who was staying there as well. And then she had decided she was going to go home. And my sister was born probably a few months before that time. She then decided she was going to move to the Eastern Cape. Well, she was just going there temporarily because she was not well.
She was not well, yeah.
So she was going to Queenstown. She was going to go home. I then moved and stayed with my aunt while my mom was there. I stayed there for a few months. At the time, there was a church not so far from where we're staying, which was the Methodist Church.
Yeah.
The Ivory Park Methodist Church, yes.
Okay.
Which was led by a minister at the time, was called Smangaliso Kumar, or Reverend Smangaliso Kumar. He's a professor now who teaches at UKZN.
Okay.
So I stayed there, and in July of that year, I remember my aunt who was staying in Swanaville came to Ivory Park, and she said we had to go to the Eastern Cape. And I was so excited because it was my opportunity to see my mom. So I was like, great. You know, I remember that trip we went by train to Eastern Cape. I remember that trip very well because I was so excited to see my mom. I hadn't seen her in months. And I think her not being well as well kind of troubled me. I was 9 at the time. I was 9 years old. We went to the Eastern Cape. We got there. The mood was something that was very sour. I remember we got there, and probably within 30 minutes of being there, I was called into a room by my grandmothers that were there, some family elders, and I was told my mom passed away.
Oh, wow.
And I think my world shifted that day. Everything just shifted because there was a father I had that I knew nothing of, and I had short memory of. And here's the one person who I still had questions for about this man and all that. And I was told that person is gone, you know. And then we buried my mom. During that time when we were there, we buried my mom. Before we left Eastern Cape, then there was a conversation around what happens
to the child.
to the children, because now it was myself and my younger sister.
Yeah.
My older sister was staying with her side of the family in the Eastern Cape. And I remember the conversation, everyone was just saying, hey man, I've got responsibilities. I've got children to take care of. I won't be able to do this.
I can't take.
And that conversation broke me for the longest time. And I think part of what developed in terms of the relationship with my family was because of that conversation. Because it was as if nobody was availing themselves.
Yeah.
And the aunt who had raised me was saying, look, I'm going to take the younger one. I'm definitely going to take the younger one. I'm going to take Lonwabo, but I need help.
Yeah.
I definitely need help. And then we got back to Johannesburg after the funeral. And when we got back, there was an old lady in Ivory Park who we used to call Umakulu, Mam Zabeko. She's a Bible woman.
Okay.
She is my prayer warrior. She used to come all the time, long before, even when my mom was sick.
Yeah.
She used to come because she would see us at church. I was very active. We would be singing at church. We'd be with those kids who were in the front row all the time. It was hard not to miss us, you know. And she would come to my aunt's place in Ivory Park and she would pray with us all the time. She would pray for me. And when we got back, she came with Reverend Smangaliso Kumalo and said, well, you know, there's this thing that has happened in this family. And Reverend Smangaliso Kumalo was someone who was touched by the situation. He then said, look, it's either I'm going to get someone who's going to support you from here, or I'm going to take you somewhere else where you can be taken and raised. And because of that conversation, I needed to shift. I didn't believe I could stay with my family.
Yeah.
I really felt rejected at that point. And we had a conversation with the family and him, and we decided I'd be taken to another family to take care of me. That's when I moved to Calvary Methodist Church. There was Reverend Ellen Story at the time who was there, who had arranged for a family, which was Anna Marie Fesfeld, to come take care of me. And she brought me in, and I used to stay with her helper.
Yeah.
I stayed with the helper, moved. It was a difficult move as well, because at the age of 9, I was moving to complete strangers. I'd moved from my family, and there was this gap now all of a sudden. And Mam Zabego used to always come and see me there, and she would pray for me. Reverend Smangaliso Kumalo was someone who would come constantly and pray for me. Reverend Ellen Story was someone who was watching me all the time. He would come visit me Sunday. He would ask me how I'm doing. Then there was Reverend Sivio Waku, who came as well at Calvary at that point. And he was someone who was also actively watching me, coming to see if everything was okay. Now, the family that was taking care of me was the Kumalos who were there, Constance Kumalo and Robert Kumalo. And what had happened was that Constance fell ill first.
Oh, gosh.
And she passed away. That took me back again to a space where I had, few years earlier, had lost my mom. And here was a woman who was playing the role of being my mom who passed on again. And Robert subsequently passed on as well after that. And probably around the age of 13, I was staying alone again there, because Anna Marie now, her business had collapsed and she had to move back to America. I was in a private school, which was called Jubilate. It's just behind, at that point was just behind Calvary Methodist Church, yes, before it moved to Crowthorne. And one day I was given a letter to take home, and it said that school fees had not been paid for 6 months. Shucks. And at some point schooling has to stop. So and this was a private school. There was no one to give it to at home, I took the letter to Reverend Waku, and he said, look, we'll see what we do. But something in me said that Monday I must go straight into the principal's office, and I went straight into the principal's office. I was probably 13 at the time. I said, look, I need to go to school. My mom died. My stepmother has just died, the one who was taking care of me. The lady who was paying this, the business collapsed. They are in America. So what happens now? And then I was told she will talk to the board of trustees, and the following week I was told I mustn't worry about school fees. I can just come to school every time. And Reverend Waku used to make sure that I've got something to eat and so forth. And then Reverend Waku came back to me and said, look, we found a family now that will take care of you. And I must say, Keneilwe, at that point, there was a point where I even had a prayer to God. I was like, God, I think you can take me. I think you can take me, because I felt it's as if I was never meant to be loved. I was somebody where I had the struggle with my own family, and now these people around me kept on dying. So really my spirit was down. And I had not enjoyed my childhood, because I had to be on survival mode ever since my mother died. I had to be thinking about where would the next meal come from? How would school fees be paid? Let me go talk to this one and tell my story, so that someone can hear my story and be able to provide. And Reverend Waku took me to a family that was staying in Country View, the Lebilos family. And I remember I met Mam Lebilo, and when we got there, we had a long conversation. Then her husband came home later that afternoon. And when I introduced myself to him, he said to me, my name is Baba.
Wow.
My world shifted again.
Yeah.
I literally felt this is where God has been preparing for me to come.
Yeah.
I was 13 when I moved in with the Lebilos family. I've been with them ever since. They've taken care of me. They opened their doors. I've been a child in that family. Their children, Tswenene and Sela Lebilo, opened their arms and took me in as a brother. I've never at any stage felt like I was someone who was born outside that family. I finally found a family who even met my family. We became one big family with everybody. So, and everything ultimately that I became was because of that family. I found a father who opened his arms to me, and yes, that's my life story.
Wow. Yeah, you said so much. Like, as you're speaking, my mind is going in a lot of different directions, and I'm like, wait, but before I even knew about Lonwabo, I didn't know that the topic will identify with your story so much, because I feel like it's befitting, you know. I feel like it's the perfect topic for us to engage, especially because now you have narrated how you grew up and all of that. And it's interesting that you were staying with the Lebilos family, ne?
Yes.
They are Tswana speaking.
They Pedis
Pedis.
from Zebediela. They're from Zebediela in Limpopo.
So how did you keep your mother tongue? Like,
well, growing up in Joburg, you get to speak all these languages already because I was from the West Rand. I grew up in the West Rand a bit, where I was Xhosa. The first school I went to was a Xhosa school, but I would be playing with Zulu speaking, Sothos, Tswanas, Pedis. You picked up all these languages, so your tongue became quite flexible. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I love that your mother tongue is still there.
Yes.
To the core. Like, you've never lost it. Because if it was anyone, I'm just thinking they would have adopted the language in that family, then left their mother tongue, because you are young, you know, you don't know better. You just like, I speak what they speak in this house. So yeah. Wow, your story is inspiring.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
It's inspiring that you kept your head even during the difficult times, as young as you were. And condolences to you for the losses that you have experienced.
Thank you so much.
It's deep. It cuts deep. Listening to you now, that the many moves that you had to make, from moving from here to there, and then the family saying, well, we can take you, but I can't take you until something needs to give, or I can't take care of you now, because also I have my own challenges. And it's always a challenge, because God had an intended purpose for men. And if the society is not willing to build the men so that they can have an influence in the world, it becomes very difficult, and then you find yourself not knowing, who am I? Which brings me to my next question. What would you say, knowing what you know and your experiences and your faith, what would you say God's intention was with men when he created men? Because that was the first person that he created.
It's an interesting question, and I think we constantly exploring to answer that question.
Yeah.
Because we read in the Bible that I think it's in Genesis 1, somewhere in, I think, verse 26, where God makes the statement that let us create mankind in our image.
Yeah.
And it's the question of what does it mean for God to want to create mankind in his image.
Yeah.
You know. And one thing I've always found in trying to explore the question of purpose as well, it comes to your question. And you find that the very essence of God, the characteristics that exist of God are the reason he created mankind. So we are created because God is loving, and therefore our ultimate response to life is to be people who are loving, because we are created for love.
Yeah.
We are created by a provider, and therefore our very essence as people who are created by a provider are to be providers.
Yeah.
And all these things, all these wonderful characters that you can put around God, it means we were created for that reason. And therefore, when you are exploring even the question of purpose as men, we need to go back to that very statement of let us create mankind in our own image. And ask, what is the image of God?
Yeah.
And it's a topic we're constantly exploring, because sometimes even answering the question of the image of God is dependent on situations that people go through.
100%.
It depends on specific seasons that you are in. So what God is to me in this current season God will not necessarily be the same thing in the next season, or to even you.
Yeah.
So because our God is also not static. He's not static. He's an ever evolving God who evolves with his people.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love it. God is not static. I'm going to keep that in. It's going to be my mantra for going into the week.
Yes.
I'm going to use
No, he's not static.
all the time when I go into a boardroom. God is not static. I'm going to use that.
He's evolving. He's evolving all the time.
Yeah. And I think many women, and I would speak for myself and the other people that I've engaged with, we tend to want to box that this is how a man should be. And the challenge is that we have created our own understanding of men, but we've never really asked men to help us understand them. And that is also a challenge that I'm longing to explore further. And I want to understand men from their perspective, so that I don't box to say a good man should look this way. If you don't look this way, then you are not a man. What would you say is the role of a man in the world, the society, at work, the churches, and just in life in general?
The difficulty, what is happening in our world today makes it even difficult to have this conversation.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a conversation we tiptoe around because of what is happening with gender-based violence and femicide in our country. Every second day we are reading something that has been done by another man. And when you have to explore this conversation of what a man is, it becomes very difficult. And what we have not seen is that there's been a huge shift. What the generations before us, the image of a man and the role of a man in society has shifted
quite a bit.
And we've not had the conversation of what has the shift done to the man.
Yeah.
The dynamics of society in itself and how society has evolved. Do men find space of expression within that environment? And how do we understand ourselves in that environment? I think that's a conversation we have not had.
Yeah.
And the difficulty is that with women, bringing women on board when men themselves have not had that conversation even becomes worse.
True.
And I understand women need to know, because women are the victims of these men.
Men, true.
So if these men have not come together and say, but who are we?
Yeah, and what is our place?
Because what my dad was in his generation and his father's father and so forth, and where I find myself are two different spaces.
True.
And therefore there's a need to continue to exploring that, because ultimately a man is a person who coexists with a woman.
They can never be one without the other.
Yes, they coexist.
Yeah.
And what does that coexisting mean? And I think we have to have that conversation. But before we even come to you as women, we need to have that conversation.
Yes, man.
Yes, because even our own dynamics as men has shifted now, we express ourselves differently. Whether you want to even see manhood as a sexuality and issue and so forth, there are different dynamics there. How do we even relate to one another as men?
True.
So I know I'm not answering you actually, but posing more questions. But my questions are coming to saying that there needs to be a conversation.
Yeah, men need to talk about it.
Yes, men need to talk. And that's the key thing. We don't talk.
100%.
We don't.
And I think that's why maybe we as women, we jump to the conclusion of, this is what a man should look like in my understanding, or this is what I would understand a man is. And without that conversation, I guess I believe we'll continue to misunderstand men, because I truly believe that men are misunderstood. Especially because there's never been a platform, like you say, for them to truly express themselves. And the generation before you guys was that a man can never be emotional, a man can never show a woman their weaknesses, a man can never engage in certain way. And it has really made it difficult for this generation of men to actually be vulnerable around us, to show us their emotions. But I love that we see more men being emotional, crying, and letting us in more on their emotions and breaking that shell that the world has somehow said, if you are a man, you cannot be seen being weak. Or
I think it's the Dr. Miles Monroe in a book that he wrote. I can't remember the title of the book, but it had to do with the evolution of men, the shift of men into this current generation.
Yeah.
And he talks about the fact that the missing link is the inner conversation with the man.
True.
Of saying, who are you?
Yeah.
And even exploring that question is taboo, because men find themselves in spaces where, firstly, they don't understand that space, and how do they express themselves in that space.
Yeah.
And I've always said to some of my friends and colleagues that the issue of patriarchy has not only impacted women,
True.
it's affected men, because in correcting patriarchy, men find themselves lost in that world that is trying to shift and accommodate people. So in fact, if there was a world with no patriarchy from the very beginning, I think women and men would be in a much better place. But because patriarchy existed, it did not only disadvantage women, it disadvantaged men
as well.
Whereby in the correct environment, men find it difficult to relate and understand who they are.
Yeah. Yeah, that's deep. That's it. Well, I hope someday, somehow, we're going to have a men conference for real, where men talk about real issues, the real one, not the makeup one, the real one where men can be in a space where they feel safe to express themselves, because they are worthy of that. They deserve it, in order to get them to understanding themselves. I think conversations must be had, which brings me to my next question then around you as a man and identity. Having said or narrated your story, was there ever a time where you questioned your identity because you moved houses, you stayed with different families, also your family not wanting to take you in at the time that you needed them the most? Was there ever a time where you questioned your identity as a man?
Many times. And it started with questioning my identity as a boy. I indicated to earlier on that I never knew my biological father, but I have memories of visiting him in jail with my mother. And those questions, even by the age of 7, 8, I was trying to understand. I remember going to see my father, I could not ask my mom, though. She was also a very rough person. It was never easy to just walk up to and ask those kind of questions. But I thought the older I grow, I will grow the strength to be able to ask her. But unfortunately, she passed, and I could not ask those questions. So, one, I could not place my identity on my father because I never knew the man. And then I had to rely on my mother's identity to express who I am. And because of the way society has conditioned us, I also had to relate my identity to my mother's father, was my grandfather, who died also a few years after I was born. But I had to understand who was this man. Because now I bear his surname, who was Ganelo. So if I am to somehow place my identity, it must be placed on him. He's the man I must now link my identity to.
He's the beginning of the...
And not much was known about that man. And obviously, because of the turn that things, the way things turned with my family as well, I did not spend much time with the Canelos. I moved to another family that was taking care of me, and I still had to kind of explore who are these people. Because they were from the Free State originally, so it was a mixture. They were from Harrismith, so there were Zulus and Sotho-speaking people. I stayed with them, but I was not them. Whenever they would have their ceremonies, I'd be excluded in that because it was the family doing those things. So even then, I was kind of lost in transition, in trying to understand my own identity. And then finally moved to the Lebilo family, who are another family from Limpopo. And finally, I came to understand from the man who was raising me into the kind of man that I am, that you have to build your own character as a man. You have to build your own identity. You have to ultimately become the man that you desire to be. And I became the man that I am today from seeing him, you know. It was not about the surname.
Yeah.
It was not about the DNA, but it was about the character of the man.
Yeah.
It was about the values of the man. It was about how ultimately you can build yourself from looking into something. So that's when I began to understand that identity actually has nothing to do
With the surname.
but it has to do with the values that are embedded in the man. It has to do with the character of the man, because ultimately that's what we relate to. And I related that to the man who raised me. My father was that. And that I was able to relate because I was like, this is what I want to become, you know. The fact that he did not care what my surname was when I walked in through that door, but he saw a young man who was in need of love, and he transferred that love to me. And I said, I need to become that human being.
Yeah.
That's the kind of man I need to be. That's the kind of values I want to have, so that when someone speaks of me as a man, they speak of those values.
Yeah, true. Oof, that's deep. And I guess the misunderstanding or the mistake that we make is we link identity to the surname. And in many cultures, we don't document as African people, you know, we don't know the history that deep to understand this is where we come from and this is why we ended up here. To even an extent, some of the surnames, over the years, they lost the spelling was done
Yes.
wrong, and then we lost identity to that original surname, or we took on another man who married our parents' surname, but we're not
Yes.
actually from that surname. So I guess identity can then not be always linked to a surname because our paths are different.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, surnames are very important.
They are,
It's
yeah.
who we are, it's our lineage.
Yeah.
But without values being added to that name, without character, those surnames become void.
Yeah.
Because ultimately it's also about what does the name stand for?
True.
You know, when I impart the surname to my son and say, here is a name, I'm giving you a name, what am I imparting to him? Is it just a name that has no identity centered in values, identity centered in a deep sense of character?
Yeah.
So that it is something that's more than just a name that I'm handing over,
Yeah.
but something that places the man in the world and also gives the man space to have impact.
Yeah.
Because without values, without character, we give nothing to society.
Yeah, you're not pouring anything.
Yes, we just simply taking.
Yeah.
And that is the problem we have.
Yeah.
We have men who simply take from the world, but who see no need to give back, who see no need to find a role and a space whereby they can express themselves, but the spaces in which they express themselves, they leave that space being different.
Yeah.
But instead, we leave that space empty. We leave wounds in those spaces. We leave legacies of hurt, you know.
Yeah.
If anything, people want our identity to be one like we never existed because of the bad impact we have.
True.
But yet, if we realize that there's so much more we can do, there's so much more we can give rather than take, we then begin to be men of substance, So that's why I say it's the name is very important. But what does the name stand for?
Yeah.
Ultimately,
What
is
it
the
anchored
question.
to?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's deep. Thank you for that.
Yes.
Thank you for bringing that clarity. I think in my mind, when I thought of identity and linking it to a surname, I only thought of cultural root. I never thought of somebody needs to have values. You know, you need to be anchored to something in order for you to carry the surname and then pour into the world. When we look at a man, we must not look at only the surname they carry, but how they show up to the world as well, and the impact that they have. So yeah, thank you for bringing that light to me. And you were raised by different men from a spiritual point of view in the church. They built your character. They helped you to shape up, you know, take up a different form and become the man that you are today. What was the importance of grounding yourself around such men at the young age that you were in? Like, how did you identify to say, this is a safe space, I can identify to this man because of I never had a dad, and how they show me love and everything else? Like, what's the impact that they had on you?
You know, I've been very fortunate in that I believe all the men who have come in my life path are people who are sent by God. From Reverend Smangaliso Khumalo, who was able to see me as a young boy sitting in those pews at Ivory Park Methodist Church and be able to see a person that God can pour into.
Yeah.
To Reverend Ellen Story, who opened his doors when I walked into Calvary and made sure that there was a family and I have a home that was there. To Reverend Waku, who never let go of the idea that if we let this young man go, he will go into the world and become something else. To ultimately my father, Andres Lebilos, who is someone who molded me and shaped me.
Yeah.
I'll forever be grateful to him. I am everything I am because of him. He literally shaped me and molded me into a man. Even got my mind thinking to spaces where I never thought. Where I was coming from, there was no thinking about you can become something in this world. There was no thinking of you can plan for a future and design your own future and ultimately work towards that future. Those were values that he imparted into me. Till today, I mean, I every time I conversate with him, I must make sure my ducks are in a row because that's what he expects of me. He understands what it has taken to actually get me to where I am, and he wants me to be accountable in those spaces. So I really believe that God was very intentional about these men around me and the role that they would ultimately play. And also, I think ultimately comes down to how do you take that and pass that on? And the responsibility in itself has nothing to do with the fact that I am not related to them.
Yeah.
But it's about being vessels in God's hands and allowing them to impart and show love, you know. I needed that.
Yeah, you did.
I needed that at that age. I was saying to you earlier on that there was a time where I literally said, God, take me. You know,
what am I doing?
I literally used to even talk to my mother when I was talking alone at that young age and say, but why did you leave me here? And what I did not realize all along was that behind the scenes, God was doing what he was doing, you know. And it's only with hindsight that I sit here now, I'm able to say, but Reverend Smangaliso Khumalo didn't come into my life just in Nje.
He was sent.
Yes. Reverend Waku didn't come into my life. Reverend Ellen Story didn't just come into my life that way. My father didn't come into my life just in Nje. But ultimately it was God's plan. And sometimes God's plan, the process becomes painful.
It does.
We do not realize how painful that process, and you don't see when you are in that space. All I could see was death.
And pain.
All I could see was pain. And the only thing I could see in front of me was the fact that I should also follow them, you know. But I did not see that ultimately there was life beyond that. There was love beyond that. And there were people who were willing to pour out that love. I mean, the other man who's played a very important part in my life is my brother from the Lebilos family, Wesley.
Yeah.
I mean, he became an older brother.
Stepped up.
And in many spaces, you would feel that someone would be like, hey, man, you're in my space now, you know. But he embraced me so much. He embraced me so much as his little brother, even though I tell him sometimes it's okay, you don't have to call me your little brother anymore. You can just say your brother. But I'm ever so grateful to those men. And that's why I'm saying it's about the kind of impact that men can have.
True.
If I could have all these men around me who have
rooting for you,
were rooting for me, who have contributed to what I am, can you imagine if we as men were giving that to other men?
Sure.
Would society be like this?
No.
I don't think so.
Yeah, we would actually have a different landscape. We will have different conversations around how men show up in the world. And as you were speaking, I thought of, I don't know where this scripture is, but it's about teach them in the way that they should go. And the children will then be molded, if you teach them young, they will be able. And I'm grateful for all these men that were there at the right time when you needed them, because they shaped you to become the man that you are today. And I know you are a father, and I'm sure you are passing it on to your child. How has fatherhood changed you, and how has it maybe made you better and made sure that what you didn't have, you wanna give to your child?
Fatherhood has been a very interesting journey for me. I remember when I've got two boys. When my firstborn was born, my first boy, who's 3 years old now, I remember I had a prayer on my way to the hospital. And I said, God, if he loves you the way I love you, that will be enough for me. I've never experienced such love. But for me, because of the journey that I've been in, I knew that there's a particular father that I need to be. And I knew that I will love like I've never loved before.
Yeah.
Because in the back of my head was that young boy who was longing for a father's love.
Yeah.
And it brought my heart so much joy that I can be that father that I needed at that point. And so it's been a very beautiful journey of experiencing and giving love. And I'm fortunate to have boys. So I get to really love, because I don't think we express love enough as men.
True.
We don't realize how much of love
You
we
guys
need.
have also.
And therefore, when you become a father, you have an opportunity to just pour out that love. So I'm in that space of simply just pouring out love. So I'm enjoying it really, especially because it's a space where you become what you needed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you realize that you are able to correct the environment that you are in by simply giving it what you didn't have.
True.
You get to build.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult time to also raise children who are boys. And we live in a society where, and rightfully so, that is focusing on molding the girl child.
Yeah.
And my wish is that we must never leave the boy child behind. If I can tell you a short story of when I was staying in Auckland Park, there was a guy who broke into the house. It was a standalone house. Broke into that house, and we eventually caught him with a friend of mine, took him to the police station, and he was arrested. We needed to go to court for his case. And when we got there, the magistrate was there. There was a case before ours.
Yeah.
And we got to listen to the case before ours of a young boy who was probably about 19, who was also arrested for house robbery and all that. And they placed the case before the magistrate. I've never forgotten the words of that magistrate. That magistrate looked at that boy and said, I'm sorry for what society has done to you. That broke me.
Yeah.
That broke me.
Sure,
because here was a boy who has committed a crime, and before the judge could say anything else to this boy's past sentence and all that, the first words he uttered to that young man was, I'm sorry for what society has done to you. And what I realized at that point is that we are creating a society where we are not realizing that it's this environment that continues to mold the kind of men that we see and we cry about. It is until we build the kind of society that will build the right kind of men that we will have the right kind of men. So we're focusing in the wrong space.
True.
We are focusing on the outcome and not looking at this input and the environment in which we input into, So that's why I say it's a very difficult time to raise young boys.
Yeah.
Because there is no focus on that environment and there is no focus on that young boy. As you were saying, begin to mold them while they're young.
Yeah.
But also cultivate and nurture that environment that they grow up in. so that that environment ultimately can have the right kind of output we want. Because if we don't do that, we will continue to see the kind of man that we have seen.
Yeah.
The one that will actually be the monster.
Sure.
It's terrifying, the kind of things that we begin to see. But the problem is that we keep on focusing on the output.
But we never do anything about the input.
No, and nurturing that environment.
Yeah, I think you're saying it right. There's so many programs for young girls. We do pet drives for young girls. We do take a girl child to work. We do so many things for girls, but we've never really seen impact of doing things for the young boys and helping them or molding them in the way that they should go. If you would, if the world allows and you would be able to do that, what would you do to reshape the young generations or the young men that we have? Like, what is that one thing that you would say we should do for the young men?
Oh, bring Jesus to them, man. Having a relationship with Jesus has done marvelous things for me.
Yeah.
Having a relationship with Jesus has kept me away from spaces that would have otherwise probably killed me. There are people I went to primary school with today who are dead.
Sure.
Because of the route they took.
Yeah.
Some of them are, and I kid you not, there are people I grew up with in Swanaville who are serial killers, who are rapists. Some of them are serving life in prison now. And it's all because of that environment. But also not having a relationship with Jesus.
God.
I believe having a relationship with Jesus has done marvelous things for me. And if I could just introduce Jesus to many men, and tell them walking with Jesus, what that would do for them ultimately, and how their lives can be impacted by that. Because I sincerely believe that you can never have an encounter with Jesus and remain the same.
True.
So if anything, if there's any change I could do, it's just drop Jesus on them, man. Just drop Jesus on them, man.
That is so profound. If anybody, I'm sure somebody would have said, I'll start a foundation or do this and that. And that's just a simple act of starting, or the starting point, to just bring Jesus to them and introduce God, who walked the journey with you and who's still walking the journey with you. That is so profound.
That's why I joined the movement that you and I are part of.
Yeah.
We have an opportunity to really bring young people to the spaces where they can have a walk with God. You and I know the joy of walking with God. Members of the Wesley Guild know the joy of walking with God. And it does not mean you don't have struggles. It does not mean that you will not have questions of your own identity. But it means that you don't have to do it alone.
True.
You don't walk alone.
Yeah.
And then that's why I have a passion for that movement that I lead, that I'm able to bring young people to Jesus. And I want to do more of that, going to spaces of young people who have never had an encounter, young men, True. In our movement, we're struggling to get men into the
movement.
But we need to.
Yeah.
We need to. Men are hurting, men are broken, men are wounded. Some of them don't even know,
They just need spaces.
They need spaces.
Yeah.
And these are the kind of spaces that we have for them to do that.
Deep. That's really deep. Well, I hope the men, wherever you're watching, or if you're a man and you know somebody's struggling, Wesley Guild is there for you to pour, into you as you also pour into yourself. Come join us. We are a loving bunch of people. We dance. We love God. We're crazy about God. That's one thing about us. In that space, you forget about everything, and you never live the same. That's one thing that I can vouch for, or at least speak about from my own experiences being in that space. Which brings me to the maybe two last questions, I think, if my memory is still on key. Generational curses and traumas. What's your take on that?
True, it's an interesting one. Because if I can tell you from my own testimony,
Yeah.
it's that my family struggled, and my biological family, when I mean that. Sometimes we have the option of choosing our own path,
Yeah.
and we must choose our own path.
Yeah.
But if we are stuck in spaces where we believe who we are will determine ultimately who we become, then we are wrong. The center of it for me is understanding whose you are. And if you understand whose you are, you'll understand even the scripture that says, the plans I have for you.
Oof. It's for you to prosper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So no generational curse can follow me if I understand whose I am and the plans that he has for me.
True.
And therefore I'll never be held back by any form of curse.
Yeah.
Whoever wants to catch it can catch it, but I'm gone.
Yeah.
I'm gone.
I'm not there.
My God has plans for me, and that's where I am going. So many times, the curse in itself is believing that there's a curse.
There's a curse. Oof. Lonwabo, come on with it.
The curse in itself is believing that there's a curse. You need to set your mind free from that, because the ultimate freedom comes in believing that there are greater things that are out there for you. And those greater things come from believing whose you are.
Yeah.
And the one we pray to, the one we praise, shifts us.
Sure.
Shifts us constantly,
Sure.
you know. So yeah, I don't believe really in those things.
In those things. Yeah.
I believe in the opposite, that ultimately there is a greater purpose in life,
Yeah.
and we must always constantly be in search of that greater purpose.
Yeah. And I believe that God has given us the tools and resources to speak against those thoughts, those
Power in the tongue.
Yes. I mean, he said to us, if we say no weapon formed against me shall prosper, why would we believe that a generational curse will prosper before
Amen,
we
sister.
reach
Amen.
greater things? I mean, it's easy, guys. The answers are in the Bible, I believe. The answers are in the Bible.
Power in the tongue.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
We're people of the word, man. And the word tells us whose we are.
Yeah.
And if our minds don't comprehend whose we are and what we are created for,
we'll go around in circles.
And believe in generational curses.
Yeah. That's deep. Oh, you're preaching. Okay.
I'll try not to.
See why I said you should. I ultimately thought you'll say preaching than singing.
If I could have sang that, I would have sang it, but...
Okay, and then from parting words, how do you remain anchored? You know, how do you slow leave? What is that one thing that you always go back to say, this is the path that I need to be on? We live in a very fast-paced world. It's easy for you to just miss your mark sometimes and start believing that, there's no way I'm going to get out of this. So how do you bring yourself back and center yourself?
I'm a person, as I said, I'm a man of faith. And the one thing that centers me all the time is bringing the presence of God.
Yeah.
Being in the presence of God has a way of just enabling you to reflect, you know, because before you come to a center, you need to reflect.
Yeah.
You need to be able to see where you've been, what you've done, what has been right, what has been wrong.
Yeah.
And ultimately, and I'm in a season of learning how to surrender as well. I'm trying really hard to learn to surrender to God. I'm like, because sometimes
we want to be in control.
It's like I'm in control. I'm like, God, make this work.
This is the way I want to go.
God, I want you to do it this way.
Yeah.
You know, and centering yourself is also about surrendering, being able to come into the presence of God and simply surrendering it to God and saying, God, have your way with this. You know, and then asking God, which way should I go? You know. So I'm in that season of learning that.
Yeah.
And I come to learn that through the fact that sometimes you can be busy with the things of God, but not God.
Yeah. Oof.
You know.
Yeah.
You're busy in the church. You're busy. You are doing this ministry, that one.
God.
You know how busy it can get in the guild. I'm busy with the guild all over, doing this, doing that. But ultimately, I find, and sometimes I'm like, hey, God, I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm doing this for you, but I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah.
We haven't had this conversation in a while. So part of bringing me back to and centering myself is about being in the presence of God and simply surrendering to God and allowing God to have his way with me, you
Yeah.
know. And also be in constant search of the purpose. You know, I know sometimes we think understanding your purpose is simply about God writing a letter saying to you, this is what you must do.
Yeah.
But we don't realize that sometimes that's a journey.
True.
Finding
you
out
get
what your
there.
purpose is a journey. And it's about enjoying the journey with God. Constantly going back to him and saying, this is where I'm at. Am I still
On the right path.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how I'm learning to do it. And I don't want to say I'm doing it because,
Yeah.
as I said, I'm
You're
learning
still
this thing
learning,
of surrendering,
Mm.
which is an important thing. But walking with God is a beautiful thing. It's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And it's only in that space that you are able to even center yourself around the chaos that is around us.
Yeah.
We also make the mistake of thinking if you walk with God, there's no chaos.
Sure. And that's where there is chaos.
Oh,
That's
you
where
probably experience it
chaos
more.
follows you.
You experience it more.
You're challenged more.
You're challenged more. You get to go through it more.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's about hanging on to God. And ultimately knowing that's the one you are searching for. You are searching for God and nothing else.
Yeah. That's deep. So I once went to a service. I think it was a Good Friday service. And the reverend that was preaching there, he said, the devil doesn't have to take anything away from us. The only thing that he's really good at is making us take it for granted.
Sure.
We go around thinking, I can't lose this, but he'll make you take it for granted. And you even forget that at one point I went to God and I prayed and I poured my heart and said, I need this job. Once you are in the job, you start taking it for granted, or he makes you take it for granted. You arrive late at work. They say, let's do performance review. You don't do it. They give you the goals, like that's the devil making you take it for granted. And that's literally the only thing that he has to do. And you lose it. He cannot take away what God has given. I think that's the essence of the message.
And not seeing that it's the provision of God.
Yeah.
Whether it's not working in this season for you or not, but it's still the provision that someone else is still praying for.
True. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this conversation and this engagement. I truly enjoyed getting to know you and your journey and everything else. I guess what's next for Lonwabo in this season that you are in?
Well, let me firstly say thank you, Keneilwe, for having me here and having me share. You even said you didn't know my stories because I never speak about it. And it's by testimony, I think, as well, that sometimes you have to open up your heart. It's a difficult one because sometimes when you talk about your own journey with God, we can't be vulnerable as men. So it becomes difficult to open up. But so thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
My journey continues with God. I'm leading in the Wesley Guild. We are really just moving this movement. We are passionate about bringing young people to God, ensuring that young people change the kind of society that we live in.
Yeah.
We have many challenges that are ahead of us because the challenges that we see in our communities are things that we must face as young people in this movement to make sure that we bring our solution to everything is Jesus Christ.
Yeah, just bring God.
We want to bring God into that situation. We want to be the hands and feet of God in these communities, and therefore that's what we are doing through this movement. So what's next is taking this movement to that height, working more with young people in that height. We are exploring in other fields as well. Career-wise, we are trying to grow, but God is faithful all the time, and we believe we'll get there.
Yeah, absolutely. With God, we will.
Amen.
There's no any other way. And he would never bring us this far to just leave us in the wilderness. He's not like that. He'll take us from the wilderness into the milk of honey. So that's how he operates. Is there a favorite scripture, favorite song that you live by that you can use as a penny drop, thought for the week?
Sure. My favorite scripture is Psalm 121.
And it
says, I lift my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. He who looks after Israel will not slumber, nor sleep.
I mean, you're a true testament of that.
Yes.
Looking at your life, God truly made sure that you lack nothing. You are not left alone. He brought the multitude to your journey to walk with you. You're not soldiering alone, and I know I hope you know that He's there in every room that you enter. God has already made a way. I wish you nothing of the less of amazing. I want you to have more of amazing things, and I hope your testimony reaches more people. It reaches more men to say, just because you're not where you want to be does not mean that's where your journey ends. God still has a bigger purpose for your life. He doesn't make mistakes. He'll never have you here if your purpose is not of this world. If it was not of this world, then I don't believe you'll be here. Because you're here, God is still going to use you to influence and to just touch many lives. Where do people find you on social media?
Sure. We're having a conversation about me and social media.
Okay, where do people find you from a church point of view? If they want to know.
Well, I am on Facebook as Lonwabo Canelo. I'm on X as at Lonwabo G, and on Instagram as well. Might not find much I post there, but yeah, I'm there.
Okay. Don't you want to share the district page, the Wesley Guild pages, where people maybe can engage with some of the works that we are doing for this year?
So you can find us even on Facebook as the Central District Wesley Guild. We are also the same on Twitter and TikTok. I believe we have a TikTok account.
Yeah.
Because I don't have TikTok, I haven't checked that out, but apparently we trend all the time. So check us out. There's Central District Wesley Guild as well.
Why don't you have TikTok?
Imagine
TikTok is it's a new place. It's a new, that's where everyone goes to debrief about their day. There's everything for everyone. I think you should try it.
Okay, yeah. We'll see.
Yeah, you should try.
We'll see.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in. I do hope that this episode leaves you knowing that uThixo unabantu bakhe, and now you are also one of God's child. May you go to God with any request and be intentional. Speak to God as if He's sitting here with you, because He's there. He said He's everywhere. He's the Spirit. He's fueling our souls. So please do not be afraid to go to God and engage with Him. Ask Him, God, where do you want me to be? What do you want me to influence? Or what is my purpose? Never draw up your own conclusion without God at the center of it, because He's the one who wrote your life, and He's the one who knows better to where He wants you to be. Please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and never miss the mark on clicking that subscription button. All you have to do is just click like, subscribe, and share this content with those you care about. We'll see you on the comment section, and thank you for tuning in. Bye.